friends, colleagues, and loved ones who couldn't make it here today? Good to go. Excellent. All right, so my name is Fred Sutherland, and I am here to provide a bit of an update on a talk that I gave here at the CMAs about 2 years ago, based on my dissertation research on the Cuyuna Iron Range. It's the southernmost iron range, and one that had been kind of underrepresented in historical literature. And part of my project back at that time in 2013 was to document a lot of different sites and historic structures with potential to tell a more important story about this range and make its significance more widely known. And so now, in this talk, in 2015, I'm going to go focus on just one specific site that I hinted at the end of my 2013 talk as something that would have some very interesting potential. And that is this Jones Iron Furnace site, a site where someone attempted to smelt iron ore right on the edge of the Cuyuna Iron Range in Aitkin, Minnesota. So here's the area I'm talking about right now. There's Aitkin County, highlighted in red. Most of my dissertation work was focused on the Cuyuna Iron Range. Here are some of the major communities, one of them now being a ghost town, the ghost town of Manganese. If you talk to local residents now and you ask them, okay, where are the boundaries of the Cuyuna Iron Range? They would say, oh, it's right in here, strictly inside Crow Wing County. Maybe some of them would mention Emily up here as well. But almost no one would think of Aitkin as a place where 100 years ago, people were seriously considering doing something related to iron mining industry, even though there was testing going on there about 100 years ago. And there was also some mining activity going on south here near Brainerd as well. So just to give that a little bit of context, you go ask a local resident now, where's the Cuyuna Iron Range? Nobody would be thinking about going outside the edge of Crow Wing County, but yet there are some interesting features out there. And the brown bands that you see listed here, these are bodies of iron ore taken from some geological charts that I was looking at. So there was some testing and potential done out here, even though mines were never established. So I mentioned this person, John Jones, who attempted to build an iron smelting furnace in Aitkin, Minnesota. So first thing I had to ask myself when I came across his name in this headline, I was doing some newspaper research. Being a historical archaeologist, that's a good place to start when you're trying to understand the history of important sites in a region. And this headline just kind of hit me while I was going through the archives. So then I had to ask, okay, so who is this guy and what was he trying to do building an iron smelting furnace in rural Minnesota? And doing a little biographical work, I actually found a great biography of him actually on Google Books. You know, go type in someone's name. Sometimes you hit the jackpot with that, and I did with him. I found out he was a gentleman born mid-19th century Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's good to know a little bit about that area. There were a lot of rural blast furnaces at that time, working on charcoal-based technology, right up until the start of the 20th century when all that began to change. This gentleman moved west. He moved to Iron Mountain, Michigan. And he became kind of a good level manager there, mid-level manager, financially successful with that. And then he started tinkering with furnace designs and kind of getting into that because his father and some of the other people in his family had been mechanics and people working with blast furnaces. And then a second furnace, the only other one that's known at least where he actually started to build and establish it, is this one in Aitkin. The one I should mention here in Iron Mountain, Michigan, is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it did operate for several years. And so part of my line of questioning when I started seeing these newspaper articles is, did he actually complete this other furnace in Aitkin, Minnesota? What design was it? Did it operate? And what happened after that time that I was seeing it in the newspapers? So those were all questions I had. But first, of course, I had to try to find the location. Where was it actually built? Because that, in the newspapers, wasn't entirely clear. So first of all, that artist furnace that you saw listed in the headlines, this is that patent drawing of it. Important thing to note here is you've got a vertical chamber here, but most of the roasting, the processing of the ore is going on in this cylindrical chamber that actually rotates. It circulates, almost like a cement mixer. Very unusual design, very innovative. Some of these details of this design did show up in later iron-making technology, but that's another presentation. However, the newspaper articles hinted that the design he was building in Aitkin was actually different from the artist furnace. Only one or two lines in this newspaper article mentioned a vertical-based design, and I had to comb through all of his patents from the beginning of the 20th century, and the only one I found that had this sort of vertical orientation was this one here. Now, for those next couple of pictures I'm going to be showing you, keep in mind this base right here. It doesn't show up in the dimensions here, but it's about 12 feet across, and it's circular. And so that's going to come around again when, after I did locate the site, because I'm going to go back here a little bit, I had to do a lot of deed research. Some of the newspaper articles mention that there are some adjacent lots and a rail line that went past where he did cite the location for this in Aitkin, and those were my clues to try to find the site. I asked around town, I asked the local historical society. They thought I was crazy. They're like, somebody's trying to smelt iron, trying to make, iron ingots right here in Aitkin. You're crazy. Nobody knows this. So go to the deed office. I try to find the adjacent lots to this one because for some reason the ownership of the site was sort of vague, not very well defined. But I did find the adjacent lots on either side, and we deduced, okay, it's probably this farmer right here on the Mississippi River. Why don't you just go drive up and ask him about this, see if he knows anything. Okay, I'll go drive up. In a nice stoical Midwestern way, I drive up, knock on his door. Hi, I think I have found an iron smelting furnace on your property. Would I be able to look at that? He's like, yeah, sure, it's been there for years. It's out in the cow pasture. You might have to walk around some cow pies, maybe push a cow aside, but it's out there. It's just sticking up out of the ground. I'm like, but there's ruins? It's above the ground? What? Yeah, I was getting like, really, really excited because I didn't think there'd be any evidence of this site left. And this guy had been sitting in his backyard for 80 years, so for him it was old news. But everybody else in town didn't know about it, or didn't seem to know. So here's that furnace. Remember again that 12-foot wide diameter? One of the first things I did, pulled the tape on it. This was about 12 feet across. So it was really exciting to find that there. The farmer had also been picking out all the cobblestones from his field and tossing them in here. So it's got a lot of waste and debris in it, but it was really exciting to see it. I'm actually standing up on a levee wall against the Mississippi River. I'm going to do some more detailed maps to give you a more precise location of this, by the way. But I just wanted to show you kind of the moment of discovery here just after the conference in May. I was very excited to see this. Some other views of that concrete foundation to the iron smelting furnace here. See, a couple feet off the ground, and a couple other views here. But right over here, that's that retaining wall I was talking about, that levee wall for the Mississippi River. So it was right against it. This wall was built in the 1960s, and so it almost nearly buried the site. It almost nearly cut it off. But luckily, they stopped right on the edge of this concrete foundation. And I also started looking around this concrete feature a little more carefully. There were some poured concrete openings like that maybe were 2 years, which is basically a big pipe that goes into the furnace. Some other parts might still be there if we remove the cobbles at some point. And also there was some interesting graffiti, like this marking down here. Now, this one is just 3 initials, J-A-R, could be a company, could be a name. But in all of the graffiti I found, this was scribed into the wet cement. This was not carved in after the fact. So I'm pretty sure this was around the time this foundation was laid. And one of the critical ones that I was able to just barely make out, and unfortunately it wasn't this one, it didn't photograph very well, but if you kind of do the tracing paper trick, where you put the charcoal down and you scrape that across, I got a name, George, and I got this date, August 20th, 1913. And what's important about that date is that it matches exactly what my newspaper articles were saying is when they laid the foundation for this furnace. So that was like the aha, found it. Definitely, this is it, this has to be the one that they're talking about. So that was really exciting. So finding that information and putting that all together, I requested to Minnesota Legacy Grant to actually do a little bit of geophysical survey work. So I didn't want to just go in digging because there could be a lot of things, there could be nothing. So I thought geophysics would be the best route to go. Looking at the site here, this is the Mississippi River. I've got an even better map of this to give you location. Aitkin is to the south. There's a highway bridge that crosses north out of Aitkin is right over here. I'll show that in another map. And that red circle, that is that concrete foundation that you saw poking up. And the levee wall is right against that tree line there. And this is the farmer's house. And those little dots are probably cows. Now then, we look at the LiDAR image, which was courtesy of a wonderful gentleman I got to actually meet through doing Olympic fencing. He also does geophysical archaeology. A man named Jeff Jones at Archaeophysics. He pulled up for me one of the nice LiDAR images we have of Crow Wing County. And if you look again at that same spot where that concrete foundation is, there's some nice, interesting, angular features surrounding it, along with some interesting horizontal ones that could be railroad grades. So this was all very exciting. This is what I put into the proposal as there's actually some potential for outbuildings. Maybe there's some good site integrity here. This is worth exploring a little further, and that's what I sought some legacy grant funds to do. So after talking with Jeff Jones, we were successful in getting our legacy grant to do the geophysical work. We defined the site area based on those LiDAR maps and trying to look at it. Now this is, again, is that County Highway Bridge, this is Mississippi River. If you guys know where the Aitkin County Fairgrounds are, that's right down there. So this is the Tibbetts Farm, it's almost right across from the fairgrounds. And it's now currently kind of a wet marshy area. Sometimes when there's a little bit of flooding in there during the spring season, because I guess it doesn't drain very well across that levee wall. But you'll see that in a little bit with some of the close-up pictures of our survey work. So then we defined our survey grid. We did two types of geophysical survey. We did, that doesn't show up too well on the bottom edge here, but we did a magnetic and resistance survey. It turned out that ground-penetrating radar was not going to work very well with the soil characteristics of the site, so that's why we decided to focus on magnetic and electric resistivity. And those would be very good for detecting things like foundations, any sort of metal remnants, but also if this furnace had gotten into blast, it might make giant magnetic anomalies, which is what we're hoping for. It really mess up the magnetic fields around it. So then that might give me a good clue, did this actually get into blast without actually having to dig up slag or some other evidence that would show it gotten into work. So here we are in August 2014, actually conducting both of those. This is the magnetometer and here's the electric resistivity. We were there collecting the data. You can see the furnace in the background in both shots here. And we did that over a course of 2 days. It actually went relatively quickly because it's a cow pasture, not a lot of heavy brush, although there is quite a bit of standing water. He came a little better prepared than I did with the boots, because sometimes it did soak through my particular shoes. But other than the high water table, it was actually a pretty enjoyable survey. Not a lot of brush cutting, so that was nice. Now, some of the results of that survey. This is where it gets a little bit tougher. Now, if you remember seeing both of those patent drawings, both the artist furnace and the one I was calling the vertical design, you always saw the circular kind of vertical stack, but you also saw something coming off the side of it in every case. And where we saw the concentration of anomalies, interestingly, is right adjacent due south of the ruin. So that could be something that would have been attached to that main circular building, or it could just be an outbuilding supporting it. It's kind of speculative at this point because, again, it was mainly just some geophysical work with a tiny bit of ground truthing, peeling back the sod to see what might be underneath some of that feature. But what we're looking at here, we're looking at a couple linear features that showed up in both the magnetic and the electric resistivity survey. So that was sort of potentially indicating that there's some sort of outstructure or supporting way there. There's also, didn't show up in this one, there's a couple horizontal features that might actually be part of the old railroad grade. Now with the magnetic one, we also picked up a couple hits that were further away, and we did some ground truthing on those, and one of them actually turned out to be a segment of railroad line, and I'll show that in the next series of pictures here. So that would suggest, again, we had a railroad grade coming across here, and that there was probably one, maybe part of a second outbuilding just south of the furnace stack. But part of the challenge with this, I should also mention here, is that if you see segment D here, this shows a significant change in the surface contours. And the reason when I asked the farmer about that is the topsoil had been stripped off in the 1930s or so. After this site had been abandoned as an industrial site, it was sold as a farm to this current owner's father. And what he did as a money-making venture was to sell the kind of rich topsoils there from near the riverside. And that means we lost probably the top 8-10 centimeters or so at least of the topsoil. And so what we're looking at here are probably really deep features. So that's why I'm thinking it's probably more foundations and railroad grade is probably what we're going to find. And then there was a little bit of dumping and infilling. He said that this might actually be a pile of waste cobbles again from some of the farming work that they did a little bit south of here. So that might not, this A might actually just be a pile of cobbles that's been added later on. But as I'll show in feature B over here, that may actually be a ruin of an outbuilding. Tentative, very tentative. Yeah. So here we're doing a tiny bit of ground truthing, and I should note, with permission of the owner. I had a really great dialogue with the property owner. If anything developed, I pretty much just jogged over to his house and like, hey, I think we found this and that. Is it okay if I turn the sod over here? And he's like, yeah, sure, just turn it back. I don't want anything the cows are going to tip over. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, he was always just very laid back, one of the most mellow people I can think of. You know, I'm coming into your house, putting wacky machines in your yard and digging things up. He didn't mind. That was fantastic. So here I'm doing a little bit of that ground truthing, like I said, and all we did was pretty much peel the sod back because these were such shallow features and then put it back when we were done, just after we documented it. Here's that segment of railroad line and a railroad spike I was talking about. They weren't completely in situ. I think that this had been, they ripped out the track and this was a segment that they missed and it had gotten left in the field. It didn't seem to be, it was oriented about the right way and it was in close to the same position you'd expect the railroad grade to be in, but just not quite in situ. And then down here we have a bit of brick rubble. And that is what I think might be that second B feature just south of the main concrete stack ruin there. And so that might be a potential outbuilding. And so that was kind of awesome to see that maybe there was actually some building going on that was just outside of the furnace deck. So maybe you got a lot further along than I first realized in the newspapers. And now I want to wrap up with a little bit of conclusions. So I talked about very briefly that especially the magnetometer work, would it show those big magnetic anomalies that I hoped would indicate that this furnace had gotten into blast and it actually produced something and maybe changed the soil characteristics around it? The short answer is talking to Jeff Jones and his expertise. He's actually done a few other iron working sites that have caused magnetic anomalies. He didn't see those here. He didn't see any big change in that. So that means this builder, John Jones, he probably got pretty far into the construction of the site, but I don't think he ever got this into blast. It doesn't seem to be that way. Now that's a tentative, but especially with some of the topsoil missing, it's very tentative, but it doesn't look that way from the geophysics that he did. Also, because it never got quite into blast, but he got pretty far along before he gave up on it and moved on to other things, it probably meant that the hype I was reading around some of the booster sort of mentality in a lot of the newspapers was probably a bit overinflated. The realities of the ground were a lot more difficult than he realized when he came in there and tried to build that site. And that fits with some things that I also learned during my dissertation research, that especially fuel costs and transportation got to be a bit more expensive when you got away from even these rail hubs here. So I think he ran into some more difficulties than he first anticipated, and then he just wanted to get out of a bad investment. But the Aitkin construction was substantial. At least we have evidence of a railroad grade that had been put in and some outbuildings. So he didn't just get a little bit of the concrete stack poking out of the ground. He actually got to get more of the site established. And then, yeah, like I mentioned with that soil removing activity, that's really sort of disturbed things, and I think a lot of what would have been the near surface potential has sort of been lost because of that soil stripping event. And so I'm not entirely sure. I see David Mather back there. We talked a little bit about maybe this site had potential to be added onto the National Register as an archaeological site. Not entirely sure that can happen because of the integrity's been damaged by that soil removing event. But we can talk about that in a little bit. I'm wrapping up my dissertation now. Jeff Jones wrote a great report for it. If he hadn't filed it with the office there, I'd be very glad to pass along a copy to anybody. And with that, that's my last slide. And anybody has some final questions, I'll be happy to take them after the conference here.